My name is Edwin Mortal, and the day I buried my grandfather was the day I thought I knew everything about him. 78 years of stories, lessons, and Sunday dinners. But standing in that lawyer's office 3 days later, listening to a clause in his will that made my blood run cold, I realized I didn't know him at all. The condition was simple. Before I could inherit anything, I had to find the child he never told anyone about. A child who, according to the dates, would now be in their 40s. A child that meant my grandfather had kept a secret for over 4 decades. And the worst part? My entire family was sitting in that room when we heard it, and not one of them looked surprised. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tell me, what would you do if you discovered that everyone you trusted had been lying to you your entire life, and the one person who could have told you the truth just took it to his grave? The rain had finally stopped by the time we left the cemetery. That thick, oppressive Massachusetts rain that makes everything smell like wet concrete and regret. I stood by my car longer than I should have, watching the grounds crew begin to pack up their equipment, watching my family disperse into their separate vehicles without so much as a backward glance. My grandfather, Martin Mortal, had been the center of our family for as long as I could remember. He wasn't warm or particularly affectionate, but he was solid, dependable, the kind of man who kept his word and expected you to do the same. I'd spent every Saturday of my childhood in his workshop, handing him tools while he fixed everything from lawnmowers to pocket watches. He never talked much during those hours, but when he did speak, I listened. He taught me how to measure twice and cut once, how to read the grain of wood before making a cut, how to understand that patience wasn't weakness, it was precision. My father had always been too busy climbing the corporate ladder to teach me anything practical, and my mother had been too focused on maintaining appearances to notice I existed half the time. But Grandpa Martin saw me, or at least I thought he did. The funeral had been exactly what you'd expect. Distant relatives I hadn't seen in years suddenly appearing with casseroles and condolences. My father giving a eulogy that sounded more like a business presentation than a goodbye. My mother dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue she never actually used. My older sister, Caroline, checking her phone every 5 minutes like she had somewhere more important to be. And me, standing at the back, feeling like I was the only one actually grieving. 3 days later, I got the call from Patterson and Associates, the law firm that had handled my grandfather's estate for the past 30 years. They wanted everyone present for the reading of the will. I almost laughed. A reading of the will, like we were characters in some old movie. But I went because it felt like the last thing I could do for him. The law office was downtown, tucked between a coffee shop and a dry cleaner in one of those old brick buildings that Boston refuses to tear down. The waiting room smelled like leather and old paper. My family was already there when I arrived. Dad sat with his legs crossed, checking his watch. Mom smoothed invisible wrinkles from her skirt. Caroline scrolled through her phone with the kind of focus most people reserve for actual work. I took a seat across from them and waited. The lawyer, a thin man in his 60s named Gerald Patterson, called us into the conference room at exactly 2 o'clock. He had the kind of face that had seen too many family fights over money to be surprised by anything anymore. We sat around a long mahogany table that probably cost more than my car. Gerald opened a thick folder and began reading in that flat legal tone that makes everything sound both important and completely meaningless. Most of it was standard. The house in Newton went to my father, the investment accounts split between my parents, some jewelry for my mother and sister, a vintage car collection I didn't even know existed, also to my father. I wasn't expecting much. Grandpa Martin and I had been close, but I'd never assumed that meant anything in terms of inheritance. I was fine with that. I didn't need his money. I just wanted to remember him the way he was. Then Gerald cleared his throat and pulled out a separate envelope. This one was sealed with red wax, old-fashioned and deliberate. He broke the seal carefully and unfolded a single sheet of paper. "What I'm about to read," he said, looking directly at me, "is a conditional clause. It specifically names Edwin Mortal as the sole beneficiary of a separate trust valued at approximately $1.2 million, as well as the property located at 47 Meadowbrook Lane in Brookline." The room went silent. I felt everyone's eyes shift to me. $1.2 million. A property in Brookline, one of the most expensive areas in Greater Boston. I'd been prepared for a watch, maybe some tools from the workshop. Not this. Gerald continued, his voice steady. "However, the inheritance is contingent upon the following condition. Edwin must locate and make contact with the biological child of Martin Mortal, born in 1981, whose existence has not been disclosed to the family. Upon successful verification of identity and contact, the inheritance will be released. Failure to complete this task within 1 year will result in the assets being donated to charity." I couldn't breathe. The words didn't make sense. Biological child. Born in 1981. I was born in 1989. That meant this person was 8 years older than me. My grandfather had another child, and nobody told me. I looked at my father. His face was stone. No shock, no confusion, just a tight jaw and eyes that wouldn't meet mine. I turned to my mother. She was staring at her hands, lips pressed into a thin line. Caroline had finally put her phone down, but she wasn't looking at me either. She was looking at Dad. They knew. All of them. They'd known, and they'd never said a word. Gerald folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. He slid it across the table to me. "There's a bit more," he said quietly. "Your grandfather left instructions. He's provided some starting information. A name, a city, a few other details. But he's made it clear that the search is yours to complete. He believed you were the only one who would do it for the right reasons." I took the envelope. My hands were shaking. I wanted to stand up, to demand answers, to scream at all of them for sitting there like this was normal. But I didn't. I just held that envelope and stared at the table. The meeting ended shortly after. There were other minor assets to discuss, but I didn't hear any of it. I stood when everyone else stood. I walked out when they walked out. In the parking lot, my father finally spoke. "Edwin," he said, stopping beside his car, "let it go. Whatever he wrote in there, just let it go. It's ancient history. It doesn't concern you." I looked at him, at this man who'd spent my entire life putting work above everything, who'd missed every school play and every baseball game, who taught me absolutely nothing except how to feel invisible. And now he was telling me to let it go. "Why?" I asked. My voice was calm. Too calm. "Because it's complicated," he said. "Because dragging up the past won't change anything. It'll only hurt people." "What people?" I asked. "Him? He's dead. You? You don't seem hurt. You seem annoyed." His face hardened. "Watch your tone. I'm still your father." "Are you?" I said. "Because right now, I'm not sure what that word even means in this family." I got in my car and drove away before he could respond. I didn't go home. I drove to the one place that still felt like it made sense, my grandfather's workshop. The house had been left to my father, but I still had a key. The workshop was detached, a small converted garage at the back of the property. I let myself in and stood in the doorway, breathing in the smell of sawdust and machine oil. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Tools hung on pegboards in perfect rows. Half-finished projects sat on the workbench. A coffee mug, still stained, sat beside his favorite chair. I walked over to the bench and ran my fingers along the wood. Smooth, worn, familiar. Then I sat down and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. My grandfather's handwriting, neat and deliberate. The letter began simply, "Edwin, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you're reading this, it means I never found the courage to tell you the truth while I was alive. For that, I'm sorry. You deserved better." In 1980, I met a woman named Claire Dawson. I was 43, she was 31. Your grandmother had passed 2 years earlier, and I was lost. Claire worked at the library in Cambridge. We met by accident. I'd gone in looking for a book on woodworking, and she'd helped me find it. We started talking. One conversation turned into coffee. Coffee turned into months. I'm not proud of what happened next, but I won't pretend it didn't. Claire got pregnant. We talked about what to do. She wanted to keep the baby. I panicked. I was older, your father was already 18 and in college. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I didn't think I had it in me to start over, so I made a choice. I gave her money, enough to move somewhere quiet and raise the child without needing anything from me. She moved to Portland, Maine. We agreed I wouldn't be part of the child's life. It seemed easier that way. Cleaner. But it wasn't. Not a day has passed that I haven't thought about that decision. Not a day I haven't wondered what kind of person that child became. Whether they have my hands or Claire's smile. Whether they're happy. Your father knows. I told him when he was 25, after he'd gotten married and had Caroline. I thought he was old enough to understand. He wasn't. He was furious. Said I'd betrayed your grandmother's memory. Maybe I did. He made me promise never to tell anyone else, and I kept that promise for a long time. Too long. But you, Edwin, you're different. You've always been different. You ask questions. You care about things that don't benefit you. You see people, not just what they can do for you. That's why I'm asking you to do this. Not for me, not for the money, but because that person deserves to know they weren't forgotten, that someone cared enough to find them. Her name is Natalie Dawson. She was born on March 14, 1981, in Portland, Maine. Claire passed away in 2003. I found out through an old mutual friend. I don't know where Natalie is now. I don't know if she even knows about me. But I'm trusting you to find her, to tell her the truth. And if she wants nothing to do with this family, I'll understand. But at least she'll know. At least someone tried. The house in Brookline was the first house I ever built. I always thought I'd give it to you one day. Now I am. But only if you finish what I couldn't. I'm sorry to put this on you, Edwin, but I couldn't think of anyone else I'd trust with it. Take care of yourself. And if you find her, tell her I thought about her every single day. Martin. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. My grandfather had a daughter, Natalie. She'd be 44 now, and somewhere out there, she had no idea that the man who'd given her life had spent decades thinking about her. I sat in that workshop until the sun started to set, the light filtering through the dusty windows in soft orange streaks. I thought about my father's words, let it go, ancient history. But this wasn't history. This was a person, a living person who'd been erased from our family like she'd never existed. And that didn't sit right with me, not even a little. I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. At the top, I typed Natalie Dawson, born March 14, 1981, Portland, Maine. Then I stared at it. I had no idea where to start, no idea what I'd even say if I found her. But I knew one thing. I wasn't letting this go. Not for my father. Not for anyone. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying my grandfather's letter over and over in my mind. The way he'd written about Claire, about the choice he'd made, about the regret that had followed him for decades. It didn't sound like the man I knew. My grandfather had always been so sure of himself, so steady. But that letter was full of cracks, full of pain. It made him human in a way I'd never seen before. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to tell my family what I was doing. They'd already proven they couldn't be trusted. If my father had kept this secret for nearly 40 years, he wasn't going to suddenly support me digging it up now. I needed to do this quietly, carefully. I started with the basics. I opened my laptop and searched for Natalie Dawson, Portland, Maine. Hundreds of results came up. Social media profiles, LinkedIn pages, public records. None of them matched the birth date. I tried narrowing it down. Natalie Dawson, born 1981. Still too many. I spent hours scrolling through profiles, comparing faces to my own, to my grandfather's, looking for some hint of familiarity. Nothing. By the afternoon, I'd hit my first real wall. Public records only went so far, and without more specific information, I was just guessing. I needed help. Professional help. I found a private investigator online, a woman named Angela Ortiz who specialized in locating people. Her website was simple, no nonsense. She had good reviews and a phone number. I called. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk and professional. Ortiz Investigations. I need help finding someone, I said. It's complicated, she replied. Tell me what you've got. I explained the situation. The will, the letter, Natalie Dawson, Portland, Maine, 1981. Angela listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This is going to take some time. Birth records from that era aren't always digitized, especially in smaller states like Maine. And if she's changed her name, married, moved, it gets harder. But it's not impossible." "How much?" I asked. "A few weeks, maybe a month. Depends on how much she's moved around. And it's going to cost you." "I don't care about the cost," I said. "I just need to find her." She gave me her rate. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't hesitate. I wired her a deposit that same day. While I waited, I went back to my grandfather's house. My father had already started going through things, boxing up clothes and old papers. I avoided him. I went straight to the workshop and started looking for anything that might give me more information. I went through drawers, filing cabinets, boxes stacked in the corners. Most of it was receipts, old project plans, warranty papers for tools that had long since broken. But then, in the bottom drawer of an old metal filing cabinet, I found a shoebox. Inside were letters, at least 30 of them, bundled together with string. The return address on every single one was the same: Claire Dawson, Portland, Maine. My hands shook as I untied the string and opened the first letter. It was dated July 1981, 4 months after Natalie was born. "Martin, she's beautiful. She has your eyes. I know you said you didn't want updates, but I thought you should know. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to see her. I've enclosed a photo. Take care, Claire." I flipped the envelope over. There was a photo tucked inside. A tiny baby, wrapped in a yellow blanket, eyes barely open. I stared at that photo for a long time. That was Natalie, my aunt. I kept reading, letter after letter, spanning years. Updates on milestones, first steps, first words, first day of school. Claire never asked for money, never begged him to be involved. She just wanted him to know. And he'd kept every single letter. He'd read them, kept them, but never responded. The last letter was dated 2002, a year before Claire passed. "Martin, Natalie's in college now, University of Vermont. She's studying environmental science. She's smart, kind, and she doesn't know about you. I've never told her. I thought it was easier that way. But lately, I've been thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe she deserves to know where she came from. I'm not well, Martin. The doctors say I don't have much time. If you're reading this, and if you ever change your mind, please find her. Tell her I loved her. Tell her she was wanted. Claire." I sat on the floor of that workshop, surrounded by letters and photos, and I felt something break inside me. My grandfather had known. He'd known everything, every achievement, every moment, and he'd done nothing. But he'd kept the letters. That had to mean something. I took the shoebox with me when I left. My father saw me walking to my car with it and called out, "What's that?" "Nothing," I said, "just some old tools." He didn't push. A week later, Angela called. I found her. My heart stopped. Where? Burlington, Vermont. She's been there since college, never left. She's a park ranger now, works for the state. I've got an address, a phone number, and a work schedule. Do you want me to make contact? "No," I said quickly. "I'll do it." She paused. "Are you sure? This kind of thing can go wrong fast if you don't approach it right." "I'm sure," I said. "Thank you." She emailed me the information. I stared at it for hours. Natalie Dawson, 44 years old, park ranger, Burlington, Vermont. There was even a photo, pulled from a staff directory on the state website. She had dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and, yes, my grandfather's eyes. I could see it, the resemblance. It was subtle, but it was there. I didn't call. I didn't email. I got in my car the next morning and started driving. Burlington was about 4 hours from Boston. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just left. The drive gave me time to think, time to rehearse what I'd say. But no matter how many times I ran through it in my head, it all sounded insane. "Hi, I'm your half-nephew. Our grandfather just died and left me a letter saying you exist. Want to grab coffee?" Yeah, that would go over great. By the time I reached Burlington, the sun was starting to dip low in the sky. I found the address Angela had given me, a small house on a quiet street, pale blue with white trim. There was a truck in the driveway and lights on inside. I sat in my car across the street for 20 minutes, trying to work up the courage to knock on the door. Then the front door opened, and she stepped out. Natalie. She was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She walked to the truck, keys in hand, and that's when I got out of the car. "Excuse me," I called out. She turned, startled. "Can I help you?" My throat was dry. "My name is Edwin Mortal. I know this is going to sound strange, but I need to talk to you about someone named Martin Mortal." Her face changed. The color drained from her cheeks. She took a step back. "Who are you?" "I'm his grandson," I said, "and I think he was your father." She stared at me like I'd just told her the sky was falling. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The street was quiet, except for the distant sound of a dog barking and the rustle of leaves in the wind. I could see her mind working, processing what I'd just said, trying to decide if I was dangerous or just crazy. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said quickly. "I just found out about you a week ago. My grandfather passed away, and he left a letter. He wanted me to find you, to tell you the truth." She crossed her arms. "The truth about what?" "About everything," I said. "About who he was, about why he wasn't in your life, about the fact that he never stopped thinking about you." Her jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about. My father died when I was 2. Car accident. That's what my mother told me." I shook my head gently. "That's not what happened. Your father was Martin Mortal. He didn't die. He just wasn't part of your life, and I'm so sorry for that. But he left something for you. He left the truth. And if you'll give me 10 minutes, I'll explain everything." She looked at me for a long time. Then she looked at her truck, like she was calculating how fast she could get in and drive away. Finally, she sighed. 10 minutes. Not inside. Out here." I nodded. "That's fair." We stood there on her driveway as the sky turned from orange to deep purple, and I told her everything. I told her about the will, the conditional clause, the letter my grandfather had written. I told her about Claire, about the letters I'd found in his workshop, about the photos of her as a baby that he'd kept all these years. I told her about my family, about how they'd known and said nothing, about how my father had told me to let it go. When I finished, she was silent. She looked down at her hands, then up at the sky, then finally at me. "Why should I believe any of this?" she asked quietly. "You could be anyone. You could be making this up." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folded letter my grandfather had written. "I also brought some of the letters your mother sent him, and photos, if you want to see them." She hesitated, then took the letter. She unfolded it slowly and read it under the dim porch light. I watched her face as she moved through the words. I saw the moment she hit the part about her mother. Her eyes closed briefly and her hand trembled just a little. When she finished, she folded it back up and handed it to me. She didn't say anything for a long time. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know this is a lot." "A lot," she repeated, almost laughing. "That's one way to put it." She looked at me, really looked at me, and I could see her searching my face for something, some hint of truth or deception.
"What do you want from me?" "Nothing," I said. "I'm not here for me. I'm here because he asked me to find you, because he wanted you to know that you mattered, that you weren't a mistake or something to be ashamed of. He made a choice he regretted his whole life, and he wanted you to know that." She wiped at her eyes quickly, like she didn't want me to see. "I spent my whole life thinking my father was a hero who died too young. My mom never talked about him much, but when she did, she made him sound like this great guy who just got unlucky. Turns out he wasn't dead. He just didn't want me." "That's not true," I said. "He was scared. He was older, he'd already raised a kid, and he panicked. That doesn't make it right, but it doesn't mean he didn't want you. He kept every letter, every photo. He knew your whole life from a distance, and it broke something in him." She shook her head. "You don't know that. You didn't know him."
I did, I said. I spent every Saturday with him from the time I was 6 until I left for college. He taught me how to build things, how to fix things. He was patient and careful, and he never wasted words. And I'm telling you, the man who wrote that letter was carrying a weight I never understood until now. She turned away from me, arms still crossed, looking out at the street. After a while, she spoke again, her voice quieter. "What's in it for you? Why do you care?" "Because he left me everything on the condition that I find you," I said honestly. "A house, money, all of it depends on whether I can prove I found you and told you the truth." She turned back to me, her expression hard. "So this is about money." "No," I said firmly. "If it was about money, I would have hired someone to forge a meeting and called it done. I'm here because he asked me to be, because you deserve to know, and because I think he was right. You do matter, even if he couldn't figure out how to show you that when it counted." She studied me again, and I could see her defenses starting to crack just a little. "What was he like?" she asked. "My grandfather, I mean. What kind of person was he?" I smiled, just a little. "Stubborn, quiet. He didn't say much, but when he did, it meant something. He could fix anything. I used to think his hands were magic because he'd take apart something completely broken and put it back together like it was new. He drank his coffee black, hated small talk, and he had this way of looking at you that made you feel like he could see right through you." She almost smiled. "Sounds intimidating." "He could be," I said, "but not in a mean way. More like he didn't tolerate nonsense. He expected you to think before you spoke and to follow through on what you said. But he was fair, and if you needed help, he'd drop everything." She nodded, slowly, absorbing this. Then she said, "I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to process it." "You don't have to do anything right now," I said. "I just wanted you to know. If you want to talk more, I'm around. If you don't, I understand. But I think he'd want you to have this." I pulled out the shoebox from my car and handed it to her. Inside were the letters from Claire, the photos, and a few other things I'd found. Birth certificate copies, a baby blanket my grandfather had apparently kept. Small things that added up to a life he'd watched from a distance. She took the box carefully, like it might break. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know this doesn't fix anything. I know it's 44 years too late. But thank you for telling me." I nodded. "If you ever want to talk, I wrote my number on a card. It's in the box." She looked down at the box, then back at me. "I think I need some time." "Of course," I said. "Take all the time you need." I got back in my car and drove to a motel on the edge of town. I didn't want to drive 4 hours back to Boston that night. I was too drained, too raw from the conversation. I checked into a room that smelled like stale cigarettes and old carpet, and I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. I kept replaying the look on Natalie's face when she read the letter, the way her hands had shaken, the way she'd tried so hard not to cry in front of a stranger. I thought about my grandfather, about how he must have felt writing that letter, knowing he'd never get to see her reaction, knowing he was putting this burden on me because he couldn't carry it himself. Part of me was angry at him for that, for making me the messenger, for putting me in a position where I had to deliver decades of pain and regret to someone who didn't ask for any of it. But another part of me understood. He couldn't face her. He'd lived with the guilt too long, and by the time he was ready to do something about it, he was out of time. So he did the only thing he could. He asked someone he trusted to finish what he couldn't start. The next morning, I woke up to a text from an unknown number. "It's Natalie. Can we meet for coffee?" I sat up, staring at the message. I typed back, of course. Where and when? She sent me the name of a cafe downtown. 10 o'clock. I got there early, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window. When she walked in, she looked tired, like she hadn't slept much either. She ordered tea and sat across from me. We didn't speak right away. She just wrapped her hands around the mug and stared into it like she was looking for answers in the steam. "I stayed up all night reading the letters," she said finally. "Every single one. My mom wrote to him for 20 years. She told him everything about me, and he just kept them in a box and did nothing." I didn't defend him. I couldn't. "You're right," I said. "He should have done more." She looked up at me. "But he did think about me." "Yeah," I said. "He did." She nodded slowly. "That doesn't make it okay." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't. But it's something." She was quiet again. Then she said, "I don't know if I can forgive him." "He's not asking you to," I said. "He's gone. Whatever you feel, that's valid. You don't owe him anything." She took a sip of her tea, then set it down carefully. "Tell me about your family. The rest of them. Why didn't they ever look for me?" I told her the truth. My father knew. He'd known since he was 25. My grandfather told him after he got married. My dad was furious. He saw it as a betrayal of my grandmother's memory. So he made my grandfather promise never to tell anyone. And my grandfather kept that promise. Until he died. She frowned. "So your father knew I existed? And he just pretended I didn't?" "Yeah," I said. "And my mother probably knew too, though I'm not sure when. My sister definitely didn't know until the will reading. But none of them seemed surprised when the lawyer read the clause. They all just sat there like it was an inconvenience." "That's messed up," she said. "It is," I agreed. "But that's my family. They're good at pretending things don't exist if acknowledging them would be uncomfortable." She almost smiled at that. "Sounds like a skill." "More like a sickness," I said. She studied me for a moment. "You're different from them." "I don't know if that's true," I said. "But I'm trying to be." She nodded. "I appreciate that." We talked for another hour. She told me about her life, growing up in Portland with her mother, how Claire had worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, how she'd always felt like there was something her mother wasn't telling her, but she'd never pushed, how she'd gone to college on scholarships and loans, how she'd fallen in love with the outdoors and decided to make a career out of it. She told me about her job, about the trails she maintained, the programs she ran for local schools, the quiet satisfaction of spending her days outside. It sounded like a good life, a life she'd built entirely on her own, without any help from my grandfather or anyone else in my family. And I felt a strange mix of pride and sadness hearing about it. Pride because she'd done so well despite everything. Sadness because she shouldn't have had to do it alone. Before we left, she asked me a question I wasn't expecting. "Do you think he loved her?" "My mom?" I thought about it. "Based on the letters, yeah, I think he did. I think that's what made it so hard for him. If he hadn't cared, it would have been easy to walk away. But he did care, and he didn't know how to reconcile that with the life he already had." She nodded, processing that. Then she said, "I don't know if I'm ready to meet the rest of your family." "I don't blame you," I said. "They don't exactly make a great first impression." She smiled a little, "But maybe someday." "Maybe," I said. We exchanged a real goodbye this time. She hugged me briefly, stiffly, like she wasn't used to it. Then she walked to her truck and drove away. I sat in my car for a while before heading back to Boston. I thought about calling Angela to let her know I'd found Natalie, that the job was done. But something told me this wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. When I got back to Boston, I went straight to the law office. Gerald Patterson was in his office, reviewing paperwork. I knocked on the open door. He looked up and waved me in. "Edwin," he said, "I was wondering when you'd come by. Did you find her?" "I did," I said, sitting down. "I met her, told her everything." He leaned back in his chair. "And?" And she's processing, I said, but she knows. I have proof of contact if you need it. Texts, photos from the meeting. He nodded slowly. That should satisfy the condition. I'll need to file the paperwork, but assuming everything checks out, the inheritance will be released within 30 days. I should have felt relief, maybe even excitement, but instead I just felt tired. There's something else, I said. What's that? Gerald asked. My family. They knew, all of them, and they never said a word. Why would my grandfather leave everything to me and not split it with my father or sister? What was he trying to prove? Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Your grandfather and I had many conversations over the years. He was a complicated man. He didn't always make the right choices, but he was deliberate. He left the inheritance to you because he believed you were the only one who would see Natalie as a person, not a problem. Your father sees her as a stain on the family legacy. Your mother and sister would have gone along with whatever your father wanted. But you, he thought you'd actually care. And he was right, wasn't he? I didn't answer. I just sat there, feeling the weight of it all. Gerald continued. He also wanted to give you something your father never gave you. A foundation, independence. He knew you'd been overlooked your whole life. This was his way of changing that. I left the office with more questions than answers, but I also left with a strange sense of clarity. My grandfather hadn't been perfect. He'd made terrible mistakes. But in his own broken way, he'd been trying to make things right, not just for Natalie, but for me too. Over the next few weeks, Natalie and I stayed in touch. Mostly texts, sometimes phone calls. She asked questions about my grandfather, about the family, about what it was like growing up as a mortal. I answered as honestly as I could. And slowly, carefully, something like a relationship started to form. Not family, not yet, but something. A connection, a thread. One night, she called me instead of texting. I answered, surprised. Hey, I said, is everything okay? Yeah, she said, I've just been thinking. About what? About meeting them. Your family. I sat up straighter. Are you sure? No, she said, but I think I need to. I need to see them, to understand what he was so afraid of. I can arrange it, I said, but I need you to know they're not going to welcome you with open arms. They're going to see you as a complication. I've dealt with complications before, she said. I'll be fine. I wasn't so sure, but I didn't argue. The next day, I called my father. He answered on the fourth ring. What? He said. No greeting, no warmth, just irritation. I found her, I said. Natalie. Silence. And, he finally said, and? She wants to meet you. Meet me, he repeated, like I'd just suggested something obscene. Why the hell would I want to meet her? Because she's your half-sister, I said. Because Grandpa wanted this. Because it's the right thing to do. He laughed, a cold, bitter sound. The right thing. You don't know what you're talking about, Edwin. You're stirring up something that should have stayed buried. She's a person, Dad, not a secret, not a problem. A person. And whether you like it or not, she's part of this family. I'm setting up a meeting. You can show up or not. That's your choice. But I'm done pretending she doesn't exist. I hung up before he could respond. The meeting was set for the following Saturday. Neutral ground, a small restaurant outside the city. I told Natalie to expect the worst and hope for slightly better. She laughed at that. I like your honesty, she said. When Saturday came, I got there early. I sat at a table near the back and waited. Natalie arrived next. She looked nervous but determined. She wore jeans and a sweater, her hair down, no makeup. She sat across from me and took a deep breath. You ready for this? I asked. No, she said, but let's do it anyway. My father arrived 10 minutes late. My mother was with him. My sister wasn't. Apparently, she'd decided this was too much drama for her schedule. My father walked in like he owned the place. Stiff shoulders, hard eyes, a mouth set in a permanent frown. My mother followed behind him, looking uncomfortable but obedient. They sat down without greeting either of us. My father looked at Natalie like she was something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. So, you're the one causing all this trouble, he said. Natalie didn't flinch. I'm Natalie, she said calmly,
And I'm not causing trouble. I'm just existing. My father scoffed. You want money, don't you? That's what this is about. No, Natalie said. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to meet the people my father spent his whole life hiding me from. My mother spoke up, her voice quiet. This is very difficult for all of us. Difficult, Natalie repeated. You think this is difficult for you? Try finding out your entire life was built on a lie. Try learning that your father watched you grow up from a distance but never had the courage to say hello. That's difficult. My father leaned forward. He made a choice. It wasn't personal. It wasn't personal, Natalie said, her voice rising slightly. He was my father. How is that not personal? Because he had a life, my father snapped. He had a family. He had responsibilities. And you were a mistake. The words hung in the air like smoke. I saw Natalie's face go pale. My mother gasped softly. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. That's enough, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Get out. My father looked at me, surprised. Excuse me? You heard me, I said. Get out. You don't get to sit here and call her a mistake. You don't get to treat her like she's nothing. So either apologize or leave. My father stood up slowly. You're choosing her over your own family. I'm choosing decency, I said, something you clearly don't understand. Now leave. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out. My mother hesitated, looking between Natalie and me, then hurried after him. The restaurant was quiet. A few people were staring. I sat back down, my hands shaking. I'm sorry, I said to Natalie. I'm so sorry. She was staring at the table, her jaw tight. It's not your fault, she said quietly. Yes, it is, I said. I brought you here. I told you it would be okay. I lied. She looked up at me, and her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. Not yet. You stood up for me, she said. Nobody's ever done that before. We left the restaurant soon after. I walked her to her truck, and we stood there in the parking lot as the sun started to set. Thank you, she said. For what? I asked. For trying, she said. For caring. That's more than he ever did. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. She got in her truck and drove away, and I stood there, feeling like I'd just lost something I didn't even know I had. That night, I got a call from Gerald Patterson. Edwin, he said, we need to talk. About what? I asked. Your father filed a contest against the will, he said. He's claiming your grandfather wasn't of sound mind when he wrote the conditional clause. He's trying to have it overturned. My blood went cold. Can he do that? He can try, Gerald said, but it's not going to be easy. Your grandfather had medical evaluations. He was sharp until the very end. But your father has resources. This could get ugly. Let it, I said. I'm not backing down. The legal battle dragged on for 3 months. 3 months of depositions, document reviews, and lawyers speaking in circles. My father hired a firm that specialized in estate litigation. They were expensive, aggressive, and relentless. They tried everything. They questioned my grandfather's mental capacity. They suggested I'd manipulated him. They even tried to argue that Natalie didn't actually exist, that the whole thing was fabricated. But Gerald was prepared. He had medical records proving my grandfather was lucid and competent. He had the original letters from Claire as evidence. He had my testimony, Natalie's testimony, and a paper trail that was impossible to fake. And most importantly, he had the truth. During one particularly brutal deposition, my father's lawyer tried to paint me as someone who'd preyed on an elderly man's guilt. He suggested I'd planted the idea of finding Natalie, that I'd stood to gain financially from creating family drama. I sat across from him in that sterile conference room and answered every question calmly.
I told them about the Saturdays in the workshop, about the letters I'd found, about the shoebox my grandfather had kept for 40 years, about how I didn't even know Natalie existed until the will was read. The lawyer kept pushing, kept trying to twist my words, but I didn't break. When it was over, Gerald put his hand on my shoulder. "You did well," he said. "They've got nothing." But the stress was wearing on me. I wasn't sleeping. I was barely eating. Work suffered because I couldn't focus. Every time my phone rang, I expected it to be more bad news, more legal maneuvers, more attempts to paint me as the villain. Natalie called me one night during the worst of it. I could hear the concern in her voice. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Not really," I admitted. "This is harder than I thought it would be." "I'm sorry," she said. "This is my fault. If I hadn't wanted to meet them, none of this would have happened." "Don't say that," I told her. "You have every right to exist, to be acknowledged. My father is the one who turned this into a war, not you." "Still," she said quietly, "I feel responsible." "You're not," I said firmly, "and if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change anything." We talked for over an hour that night. She told me about a trail she'd been working on, about a family of deer she'd been tracking, about the peace she found in the woods when everything else felt chaotic. I told her about my grandfather's workshop, about how I used to feel the same kind of peace there, surrounded by tools and sawdust and the smell of wood. We were different people from different worlds, but in that moment, I felt closer to her than I'd ever felt to my own father. The court date was set for early November. Gerald assured me we had a strong case, but nothing was guaranteed. "Your father's lawyers are going to try to create doubt," he warned me. "They'll paint your grandfather as a confused old man with regrets. They'll suggest the letters were forged or misinterpreted. You need to be ready for anything." I was ready, or at least I thought I was. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a judge who looked tired before we even started. My father sat on one side with his legal team. I sat on the other with Gerald and Natalie. She'd insisted on being there. "I need to see this through," she'd said. My mother wasn't there. Neither was my sister. They'd washed their hands of the whole thing. My father's lead attorney opened with a statement about family legacy and the importance of protecting a man's true intentions from those who would exploit them for personal gain. He painted my grandfather as a man who'd made a mistake in his youth and spent his life trying to move past it, not dwell on it. He suggested the conditional clause was added under duress or influence, that it didn't reflect my grandfather's actual wishes. Gerald stood and calmly dismantled every argument. He presented the medical evaluations, showing my grandfather was sharp and decisive until his final days. He showed the timeline of when the will was drafted, years before his death, with multiple reviews and confirmations. He presented the letters from Claire, decades worth of correspondence that my grandfather had kept and protected. He called me to the stand. I answered questions about my relationship with my grandfather, about finding the letters, about meeting Natalie. I spoke clearly and honestly. I didn't embellish. I didn't perform. I just told the truth. Then Gerald called Natalie. She walked to the stand with her head high, and I felt a surge of pride watching her. She answered questions about her mother, about growing up not knowing who her father was, about reading the letters for the first time. When asked why she'd wanted to meet the family, she said simply, "Because I wanted to understand where I came from, because I thought maybe, after all these years, someone might actually want to know me." My father's attorney tried to rattle her. He asked if she was after money. She said no. He asked if she held resentment toward my grandfather. She said honestly, "I don't know what I feel, but I know I deserved better than being erased." The judge called a recess. We waited in a small room down the hall. Natalie sat with her hands folded, staring at the floor. "You did great," I told her. She looked up. "Did I?" "Yeah," I said. "You were honest.
That's all anyone can ask for." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. After an hour, we were called back. The judge reviewed the evidence, the testimonies, the documentation, then he delivered his ruling. The will stands as written. The conditional clause is valid and legally binding. There is sufficient evidence to support that Martin Mortal was of sound mind and body when the document was drafted, and that his intentions were clear.
The inheritance will be released to Edwin Mortal upon verification of completed terms, which have been satisfied. My father's face went red. His lawyer started to object, but the judge cut him off. "This matter is closed. Court adjourned." I sat there for a moment, letting it sink in. It was over. We'd won. Natalie touched my arm. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." We walked out of the courthouse together. My father was standing by his car, talking angrily on his phone. He saw me and stopped. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the parking lot. Then he got in his car and drove away. I haven't spoken to him since. The inheritance came through a month later, $1.2 million, and the house in Brookline. I stood in front of that house for the first time on a cold December morning. It was beautiful. Brick exterior, large windows, a front porch with enough space for chairs and a table. My grandfather had built this, every beam, every corner, and now it was mine. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I thought about what I'd do with it. I could sell it, invest the money, start fresh somewhere new. But that didn't feel right. This house meant something. It was more than walls and a roof. It was a message, a legacy, and I wanted to honor that. I called Natalie. "What would you think about turning the house into something for the community?" I asked. "Like what?" she said. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Maybe a workshop, a place where people can learn trades, build things. My grandfather taught me everything I know in a space like that. Maybe we could do the same for others." She was quiet for a moment. "I think he'd like that," she said. Over the next few months, we worked together to make it happen. We partnered with a local nonprofit that focused on job training and skill development. We set up the house as a woodworking and trades workshop, offering free classes to anyone who wanted to learn. We called it the Martin Mortal Workshop. Natalie came down from Vermont for the opening. We stood together on the porch as people started to arrive. Families, teenagers, older folks looking for a new skill. They filled the space with noise and energy and life. "This feels right," Natalie said. "Yeah," I agreed. "It does." She looked at me. "Thank you for not giving up, on finding me, on fighting for this." "Thank you for giving him a chance," I said, "even after everything." She smiled. "We're both trying to make sense of a complicated man. I guess that's all we can do." We stood there for a while, watching people explore the workshop, pick up tools, ask questions. And for the first time since my grandfather died, I felt like I'd done something that mattered. Not for money, not for validation, but because it was right. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name and the workshop's address written in careful handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page. "Edwin, I don't know if you'll remember me. My name is Thomas. I was your grandfather's friend. We worked together back in the 70s. I heard about what you did, about finding his daughter, about the workshop. I wanted you to know that Martin talked about you all the time. He was proud of you, more than he probably ever said. He told me once that you were the only one in the family who saw people for who they were, not what they could do for you. He said you had a good heart. He was right. What you've done with that house, it's exactly what he would have wanted. Not a monument, not something to gather dust, but a place where people could learn and grow and build something with their own hands. That's what he believed in. Thank you for honoring him in the right way. And thank you for giving his daughter a chance to be part of the family, even if the rest of them couldn't see it. Thomas." I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my wallet. I carried it with me everywhere after that, a reminder that doing the right thing doesn't always feel easy, but it always feels worth it. Natalie and I stayed close. She visited every few months, sometimes to help at the workshop, sometimes just to catch up. We'd sit on the porch with coffee and talk about everything and nothing. She told me stories about her mother, about the life they'd built together. I told her stories about my grandfather, about the lessons he'd taught me without ever really speaking them out loud. One afternoon, she asked me a question I hadn't expected. "Do you think he loved me?" I thought about it. "I think he did," I said, "in his own broken way. I think he loved you and didn't know how to show it, and I think that aided him every day." She nodded slowly. "I wish he'd tried." "Me too," I said. "But maybe this is his way of trying now, through you, through what we built." She smiled at that, a small, sad smile. "Maybe." Years passed. The workshop grew. We added more classes, more tools, more instructors. People came from all over to learn. Some of them went on to start their own businesses. Some just found a hobby that gave them peace. But all of them left with something they'd built with their own hands. And that felt like the truest kind of legacy. I never reconciled with my father. He made his choice, and I made mine. My mother reached out once, asking if we could talk. I told her I wasn't ready. Maybe someday, but not yet. My sister sent a card on my birthday. It said, "I'm proud of what you did." I didn't respond, but I kept the card. Natalie became the family I chose. Not by blood, though technically we shared that too, but by choice, by showing up, by caring. And that meant more than any inheritance ever could. One evening, as the sun set over the workshop and the last class of the day wrapped up, I stood in the doorway and looked around. Tools hung neatly on the walls, workbenches were clean and ready for tomorrow. The smell of sawdust and wood oil filled the air. And I thought about my grandfather, about the letters he kept, the regrets he carried, the choice he finally made to set things right. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes that hurt people. But in the end, he tried to do better. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Try to do better. Try to make things right. Try to leave the world a little softer than we found it. I locked up the workshop and walked to my car. My phone buzzed. A text from Natalie. "Just wanted to say thanks for everything." I smiled and typed back, "Anytime." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.